They called themselves the Numanu, the people. But to the settlers who dared to cross the endless grasslands of the American plains, they were known by another name, the Comanche. Riders who moved like wind over tall buffalo grass, who struck like lightning and vanished into the horizon before dust could settle. They were not just warriors. They were masters of a new art, war on horseback, and their rise would transform the fate of an entire continent. Before the horse, the Comanche were wanderers among many. For centuries, the peoples of the southern plains had lived a life of quiet endurance. Foot hunters following herds of buffalo, moving with the seasons. Then, in the early 1600s, something extraordinary galloped north from the heart of New Spain. A creature unlike anything the plains had ever seen. Spanish horses, escaped stolen or traded, spread like wildfire through the wilderness. And among all who touched the reins, no people embraced them like the Comanche. The transformation was immediate and absolute. The Comanche learned not just to ride, but to live on horseback, to hunt, to fight, to travel, to raise children in the saddle. Within a generation, they became the most skilled riders the world had ever seen. Their bond with the horse was so complete that Spanish chroniclers wrote, almost in disbelief, that a Comanche could cling to his mount at full speed, hanging off the side, firing arrows beneath the animal's neck. They seemed fused human and beast, as if born from the same breath of the plains. By the mid-1700s, their power stretched from the high plateaus of Wyoming to the brush country of Texas, a vast dominion later called Comancheria. They ruled it not with castles or kings, but with mobility, fear, and mastery of the horse. To their enemies they were ghosts. They could appear without warning, strike a settlement, take captives, and disappear before the alarm reached the next river. Entire frontiers trembled at the whisper of their name. The horse changed everything. With speed came dominance. With dominance came wealth. Countless herds of mustangs and cattle captured from the Spanish and Mexican ranches that dotted the frontier. The Comanche became traders as much as raiders, dealing in horses, buffalo robes, and captives. Their camps bustled with energy. Women scraping hides, warriors tending to their mounts, children learning the first lessons of the bow and the saddle. Power on the plains was measured not in gold, but in horses, and the Comanche were unimaginably rich. To outsiders, this power looked savage, unstoppable. To the Comanche, it was balance, a new order in which they stood at the center of the world. They were both predators and protectors, fierce defenders of their way of life. Their enemies were many: the Apache, the Ute, the Spanish, the Mexicans, and soon the Americans. Each came to test the might of Comancheria, and each learned to fear its riders. The Spanish tried first. They built missions and presidios across Texas, hoping to tame the land and its people. But no wall of stone could stop the riders who knew every canyon and trail. Comanche war parties swept down on isolated outposts, their horses moving silently through the night. They burned, raided, and vanished again into the plains. By the 1780s, entire regions of northern Mexico were depopulated, abandoned to the endless sky. The Spanish crown called it La Tierra Comanche, the Comanche land. Even their enemies could not help but admire them. Spanish officers wrote of Comanche horsemanship with awe, describing riders who could lean low, touch the earth, and scoop up a fallen spear without slowing their gallop. In battle they were a storm, their war cries slicing the wind, their arrows striking with terrifying precision. To the Comanche, courage was sacred. To die well was to be remembered, to live in story and song forever. But power breeds conflict, and the plains were never still for long. By the early 19th century, a new force was pushing westward: the young United States. Settlers, traders, and soldiers crossed the Mississippi, hungry for land. At first, the Comanche traded with them, exchanging horses and hides for guns and metal tools. But peace on the frontier was always fragile. When treaties were broken, and they often were, the Comanche answered with the same ferocity that had once driven back the Spanish. Their raids became legend. Entire wagon trains vanished. Ranches were stripped of every horse. Settlers spoke of night attacks, of hoofbeats echoing like thunder across the plains, of riders who seemed to appear from nothing. To the growing towns of Texas, they were both nightmare and fascination, symbols of the untamed wilderness that America claimed to conquer. Yet, within this ferocity lay a system, one older than any border. The Comanche world revolved around the horse and the buffalo. The buffalo gave them everything: meat for food, hide for shelter and clothing, bones for tools. The horse gave them freedom and might. Each raid, each hunt, each ceremony honored these gifts. Their society thrived on mobility. Their homes were light teepees that could be packed and moved with the herds. To live was to ride, and to ride was to live. But even the strongest empire can fall to forces beyond its reach. By the 1840s, the buffalo herds began to thin, hunted by white traders and settlers who saw only profit. The railroads crept westward, cutting through the heart of Comancheria, and diseases carried by outsiders, smallpox, cholera, swept through their camps like wildfire. What centuries of warfare could not destroy, sickness and starvation began to undo. Still, the Comanche resisted. They fought with every ounce of pride and fury left to them. Leaders like Quanah Parker, the son of a Comanche chief and a captured Anglo woman, emerged to guide their people through this storm. Quanah understood both worlds: the wild freedom of the plains and the relentless advance of American expansion. He became the last great war chief, leading his people in one final stand before the inevitable surrender. By the 1870s, the US Army launched a brutal campaign to break the last Comanche strongholds. Buffalo hunters were encouraged to slaughter the great herds, starving the tribes into submission. The Battle of Palo Duro Canyon in 1874 was the beginning of the end. Soldiers destroyed Comanche camps, captured their horses, and left them to die on foot in a world built for riders. It was a slow death. The loss of the horse was the loss of the soul. When Quanah Parker finally rode into Fort Sill to surrender in 1875, it was not defeat that filled the air. It was silence. The silence of the plains without hoofbeats. The silence of a people whose way of life had been taken by a nation that could never understand it. From then on, the Comanche lived under the shadow of reservation life, confined, regulated, and watched. But even in captivity, they carried the memory of the open sky within them. The story of the Comanche Horsemen did not end there. It lives in legend, in the very fabric of the American frontier myth. The cowboy, the ranger, the symbol of freedom on horseback, all were shaped by those who came before. The techniques of roping, riding, and raiding that defined the Old West were learned in part from the Comanche. Their legacy runs in the bloodlines of every Mustang that still roams the plains. Modern historians call them the most powerful Native American tribe in the Great Plains, the masters of mobility, the empire without walls. But to truly understand their legacy, one must look beyond the wars and treaties. The Comanche were not simply warriors. They were innovators of survival, shaping an entire ecosystem around the rhythm of hooves. They turned the horse from a foreign creature into a sacred companion, creating one of the most formidable warrior cultures the world has ever known. Even their name carries the echo of the wild. Comanche is derived from a Ute word meaning enemy, yet they saw themselves not as enemies, but as guardians of balance. They took what they needed and defended what was theirs. To live on the plains was to be both hunter and hunted, and no people embodied that duality more perfectly than the Comanche. Today, their descendants still ride. The horse remains a symbol of endurance, identity, and spirit. On reservations across Oklahoma and Texas, young riders learn the old ways. The songs, the dances, the balance between man and animal. They keep alive a memory older than the fences and cities that now cover the plains. When you stand on the open prairie at dusk, when the wind bends the grass and the sun bleeds into the horizon, you can almost hear it, the faint echo of hooves across the distance. The Comanche may no longer rule these lands, but their spirit never left. It lingers in the wild mustang, in the storm clouds that roll across the endless sky, in the unbroken pride of a people who once held an empire on horseback. The savage legacy of the Comanche Horsemen is not savagery at all. It is mastery. Mastery of movement, of survival, of harmony with the land. They remind us that power does not always come from conquest or crowns, but from understanding one's place in the natural order. They lived by the rhythm of thunder, and when that thunder faded, it left a silence that history still struggles to fill. The Comanche were the wind made flesh, the storm that shaped the destiny of the American West. Their story is not one of defeat, but of endurance, a reminder that cultures can fall, yet their spirit endures in every heartbeat of the land they once ruled. The plains still whisper their name, carried on the breath of the wild horses they once rode to greatness. And as the last light fades over Comancheria, their legacy gallops on, unseen but eternal. Because the Comanche never truly vanished, they became part of the land itself, forever riding across the memory of America. So when you look across the rolling grasslands, remember them. The horsemen of the wind, the empire of the saddle, the people, Numanu, whose mastery reshaped a continent. This is their story. This is their legacy, and it still rides beneath the endless sky. If the spirit of the Comanche still echoes for you, if you felt the wind, the dust, and the power of the plains, then join us here on USA Tribes. Subscribe to keep their stories alive, to journey through the untold histories that shaped America's soul. Because every legend has roots, and every nation has a story worth remembering. Until next time, ride with the wind,